I'm delighted to be here. Thank you, Google, for inviting me to address an extraordinary collection of people. You're all incredibly influential and powerful and successful in your own right. And I am very passionate, as I've just said on the video, about women's rights, and in particular, one issue, and that is HIV and AIDS as it affects women and children. I'd like to share with you how I started my journey into this, and it's an interesting journey. Sometimes things come to you that you hadn't predicted, and just out of the blue one day, I was invited in 2003 to perform for Nelson Mandela's launch of his 46664 campaign, his HIV and AIDS campaign. This was a great concert that was held in Cape Town in South Africa with lots of wonderful artists. And we came with one collective voice to speak about this issue and to draw attention to the world. 46664, as some of you may know, is Nelson Mandela's prison number. It was the number that he carried for most of the 27 years that he was incarcerated, particularly in Robben Island. The day after the concert, Mandela invited all the artists that had performed to join with him on Robben Island to an international press conference. And if you look closely there, you can see tremendous luminaries such as Richard Branson, Beyoncé, Bono, Brian May from Queen. And it was a very exciting moment for all of us, very humbling to be with Mandela personally and stand with him in unity about the message that he was going to give to the press. Here he is. He's actually standing in front of his former prison cell. It was an incredibly symbolic moment. He's addressing the international press, and he's telling them about the pandemic that's been affecting his countrymen for the last decade. Now, you have to know that HIV and AIDS started to really kick up in the late 80s and early 90s. And I don't think the country was prepared for what it was about to face. You know, you had a huge death rate, and at that time, the people were not able to get access to treatment. It was blocked because of the president's view, President Mbeki, Thabo Mbeki. He had a particular view that made it very, very difficult for anyone to respond effectively to this pandemic. Listening to Mandela's words, he spoke about how it was affecting women and children. And I listened. I like to know about the world. I think I'm a fairly intelligent person, fairly well informed. And what really shook me was that I hadn't understood the full extent as to how women in particular were being affected by HIV and AIDS. I'm a mother, and being a mother gives me the capacity to identify with other women. And the thought of pregnant women having the virus and giving birth to a baby, beginning of its life, passing on that virus, if you can imagine the effect and the impact that that has, not just on the generation of the mother, but on the child too. So you're looking at post-apartheid South Africa, post-Rainbow Nation, and post-Truth and Reconciliation. And what you're seeing is a deadly virus spreading throughout the whole population. 1,000 people or more every single day dying unnecessarily. It's a plague of sorts. And unless you actually witnessed it, it was very, very hard to imagine the extent of the effect on the population. And I was really shocked, you know, because I hadn't read about it on the front newspapers, you know, the front pages of newspapers. You know, we have bird flu, swine flu. It almost brought the United Kingdom to a halt. We're terrified of flying anywhere, and yet, in South Africa, you have one of the highest instances of the virus, and people are dying like that. And we're not doing much about it. I mean, I'll ask you a question just briefly. How many of you knew that even currently, 1 in 3 pregnant women in South Africa are HIV positive? Would you raise your hands if you knew that? 1, 2, 3. How how many people are here? I mean, there must be about, how many, 300, 400 people, and 3 people knew that fact. You're intelligent, informed people. Don't you think it's kind of strange that you didn't know that? I thought it was very strange that I didn't know, and that's why I'm here talking about it. I made it a mission statement for myself as a woman to try to become part of the voice, part of a collective voice that could raise awareness. And that's why I'm so grateful that Google have invited me here today, because I see that you really do need to know about this. This is massive. I went to South Africa, I went back, and because of 46664, I had the opportunity to visit hospitals. A little girl here, a little baby girl. I'm not exactly sure how old she was, but I have visited baby girls of 1-year-old weighing less than a bag of sugar. This child clearly has full-blown AIDS, and you never quite know if the child is going to survive or not. So it's very harrowing when you see a child of that age infected with HIV, knowing that they don't have much of a chance. Happy children dancing in an orphanage. There are thousands of orphanages like this across the whole continent of Africa. In a way, thank God, because their parents have gone. And on the other hand, what's going on? That you have so many orphan children. This was a very good orphanage, as it happens. It was run by a Catholic nun who was an incredibly charismatic woman. I was terribly proud of the work that she'd done, and the children were in good hands. Thank goodness. I went to visit a family. This is a child-headed household, if you can remember that phrase, a child-headed household. There's something really wrong about that. Why would a household be headed by a child? The tallest boy that you can see there was the eldest brother. He's 14 years old. His mother and father had been buried in the backyard. They had both succumbed to HIV and AIDS. And he's left to take care of his 3 younger siblings. And you know that there are 14 million orphans that have been affected and impacted by HIV and AIDS, particularly living across the whole of the continent. It's deeply and profoundly shocking. And this photograph was taken in a cemetery. I was standing in a graveyard. And you can see there, it says, it's the grave cross, the wooden cross of a child's grave that was about 2 years old when they died. And I'm using this photograph to illustrate to you that HIV and AIDS affects children in a way that if they're born with the virus, they most likely won't reach their 5th birthday, which is really shocking when you come to think about a generation of babies being born into a country when they really don't have a chance. Heartbreaking. Okay, so this is a map of the global prevalence, excuse my French, prevalence, I can barely speak. The global prevalence of HIV. It's a strange little map. Across the world, currently, there are 34 million people living with HIV. And in sub-Saharan Africa, you can see the reason why the map is hugely bloated, because 23 of the 34 million are living there. Now we're going to look at adult HIV prevalence rate. 10 countries there listed. Every one of them is African. The top 3, Swaziland, Botswana, and Lesotho, with almost a quarter, or roughly a quarter, of the population of those 3 countries. Now that means 1 in 4 people are living with HIV. Now compare that to the number at the top. That is global prevalence. It's less than 1%. It makes you think. We're looking here at a photograph of a mother and child. It's a very beautiful photograph. But when we are thinking about pregnancy, 90% of HIV-positive pregnant women, 90% are living in sub-Saharan Africa. Annual pregnancies in HIV-positive women. In the United States, every year, we have 7,000 pregnancies of HIV-positive women. In Rwanda, a smaller, much smaller African country, 8,000 women are pregnant with HIV. Now, you have to think about the size of the countries and get a sense of the scale of it. Now we're looking at one hospital in Soweto township in Johannesburg. 8,000 pregnant women with HIV pass through that hospital every year. And now the final shocking statistic. Every year in South Africa, 300,000 women are pregnant with HIV and AIDS. And this really, really sums up the contrast for you. Discrepancy. "1,100 children are born infected with HIV around the globe every day. Less than one in the United States. One in Europe. A 100 in Asia and the Pacific. Now we're going to see, as you can imagine, more than 1,000 children are born every day with HIV in sub-Saharan Africa. I think I'll just let us take a moment to think about that. You hadn't heard that statistic before, I assume. I hadn't. That's why I'm here. Let's go back to the global prevalence pictures. You can see the bloated, huge map of Africa there. Something strange about that one. Africa has shrunk to nothing, more or less, when it comes to doctors working in the world. Sub-Saharan Africa has 25% of the global disease burden in the world, but only 3% of the world's health workers. Now we're going to look at staffing ratios. Healthcare workers per 100,000 population. Now, the date is 2007, but it hasn't changed 5 years later. Looking at the United Kingdom, you can see that we have 230 doctors and 1,280 nurses to every 100,000 people in the population. Going down to Mozambique, that's highlighted at the bottom. Get this. 3 doctors and 21 nurses. And I've been to rural areas in the Eastern Cape of South Africa where there were 2 doctors for 200,000 people living in those districts. And you're like, what? This can't be possible. It's absolutely true. It feels like a dark fiction. And here's another dark fiction. Unfortunately, it's a fact, not a fiction. This photograph was taken several years ago at the height of the epidemic. It was taken in a graveyard outside of Durban in South Africa, and as you can see, there are literally hundreds of graves where bodies have just been interned. And I have vivid memories of driving through South Africa, seeing striped awnings, striped tents, and thinking, oh, that's really nice, somebody's having a garden party. It wasn't a garden party. It was a funeral. And you saw them everywhere. And you saw that business was thriving with the coffin makers and undertakers. Very good business. And I went to a supermarket And there were coffins being sold beside the gardening tools of every size, from small to big. This is a kind of stark, sobering reality. Now, the thing is that we have made tremendous steps in responding to this pandemic. It's hugely challenging, and it's a complex issue without any question. In the economic downturn that we are facing today, many NGOs are having to close down, and they're having to face the reversal of fortune. And this is what we don't want to see again. So the Sing campaign is really basically my own initiative. It's not a big campaign, because basically it's just me with my 2 feet and my opinions and my voice. And I've taken myself to many countries around the globe. I've performed, I've talked, I've tried to raise this issue. I've tried to make people aware of what's actually happening, a reality in a celebrity-fixated culture that we live in, that these truths are happening on a daily basis for years, and we're not aware of them, and we're not really doing a great deal about it. And so I made a website, not myself personally, but I asked some very nice person who knows about these things to make a website, and I went off and made little film pieces. I went to Comic Relief. I'm sure many of you know about Comic Relief, magnificent organization in our own country here in the United Kingdom, who have supported me tremendously. I tried to learn about the issue so that I could pass the facts on to people, so I could be an ambassador, I could become a spokesperson, I could have a platform. And I decided that one of the things I could do on one of my sort of presentations, which happened to be at the Scottish Parliament, and as you might hear, I am slightly Scottish, very much still. And very kindly, I was asked to speak at the Festival of Politics a few years ago, and I presented this to the members there and to the general public. And I asked them if they would be very kind and make me an envoy for my country so that I could have a bigger platform. And subsequently, I've been to Malawi with the Scottish Parliament, and we visited many projects that were connected with Scotland, and I'm very happy to have that partnership, that relationship. I'm also a UNAIDS Goodwill Ambassador. Michel Sidibe, the director of UNAIDS, is the very handsome, intelligent, and compassionate gentleman who's sitting next to me. He's the director of UNAIDS. And Michel and I, when we have the opportunity, we talk together. We speak about HIV and AIDS on radio and television, and we go and talk to politicians, and we talk to civil society. We do whatever we can to keep the issue on the platform. And I'm also, as it happens, an ambassador for London, which is the city that I live in. Because I really, really just want to have as big a platform as I possibly can. I really want to galvanize as many people as I can who couldn't feel just as passionately as I do about what I consider to be a fundamental human rights issue. You know, because in the West, if you are a woman and you're pregnant, you can get access to treatment and medication. However, if you happen to be living in sub-Saharan Africa, it's very, very challenging. UNAIDS last year set up a global plan for the elimination of pediatric AIDS. This is very significant, and they pulled in 22 of the countries that are most affected by the virus. And our intention is to see the end of pediatric AIDS by 2015. And we believe that that can be done. But we know that it will take commitment, engagement, passion, inspiration. There's plenty of that in this room, by the way. We want to see mothers kept alive. And we want to see the eradication of the virus being passed from the mother to the child. It's very, very simple. It's not rocket science. It's challenging, but we believe it can be done. Here's a lovely mother. We were having a chat, She's HIV positive, by the way. And she was smiling, because that baby was due to be born imminently. And she was very, very confident, because she was on treatment, and she understood that her baby was going to be born free of the virus, because we had the medication. She was going to receive it. And that is really basically, when I see that picture, it makes me, I was very happy, and I still am when I look at it. Just before I round off, I'm going to introduce you to a little girl called Avalile. Avalile in this photograph was 7 years old, and we met her in a hospital in a very remote part of the Eastern Cape of South Africa. Her mother had AIDS, and Avalile was born with the virus. At this stage in her life, she had full-blown AIDS. She had pneumonia. She weighed less than a 1-year-old child. She was stick-thin and skeletal. And we really didn't know if that child was going to survive. And it was very, very sad, spending time, a whole day we spent with her, filming her. And when we left, we were really very emotional because we didn't know if that child was going to make it or not. And it felt very, very strange. And thanks to good nutrition at the hospital, access to good medical care and treatment, 5 months later, when we went back to film Avalile, this was the child that we saw. Now, that's not magic, and that's not tricks. That's real. And that's what I'm campaigning for, and that's what I want to see. And I want to see every single child having access to good nutrition, decent health care, treatment for HIV, and I want to see the eradication of pediatric HIV once and for all. And I really believe, and I appeal to you, please engage with this issue. Between us, we can do it. It's really possible. It's not impossible. Thank you for your time.